So when you're doing right triangle trig, you're looking at triangles, and the reason that this sine, cosine, and tangent work is because of similar triangles, which is what we did last time. So it kind of says if you have triangles, a right triangle, all of the triangles with the same angles are similar, which is that angle-angle theorem that we talked about last time. And so you're able to use the sine, cosine, and tangent. But before you do anything, you have to make sure that your calculator is in the correct mode. So everybody on your calculator, go to mode, which is right beside the blue button. Okay. So if you look at the third line down, it says radian and degree. We've only talked about angles, bless you, that are in degrees. That's all we're going to talk about. When you get to Math 3, you'll talk about radians, which it's just another way to measure an angle. But all we care about is degree. So you want to make sure every time you go to do these problems that you're in degree mode. So you go to mode, you go to the third line down, you hit enter on degree. And make sure that degree is highlighted. Okay? Every time. Because if not, it defaults to radians. So anytime the calculator is reset, it goes back to radian mode. So you always want to make sure you're in degree mode. On the final exam, that should be the first thing you do when you sit down and get your calculator. So if we look at these first ones, let's say that we know x and x are equal. So let's say x is 30 or whatever. So if we set up our ratios like what we did in our last unit, I would say that the 8 matches the what? 4. And the 6 matches the 3. Good. And then the 10 matches, good, the 5. So are all of those ratios the same? Yes. So they all give you 2. So that is what all of this right triangle trig is based off of, is similar triangles. You're only going to have one triangle, but you can just know that every single triangle that has the same angles is similar to every other triangle that has the same angles. So when you are trying to find sine, cosine, and tangent, let's write those out. So that's how you say them. So you say sine, cosine, and tangent. So that's what those stand for. So SIN is sine, COS is cosine, TAN is tangent. And if you look on your calculator, they're right above your parentheses. So sine, cosine, tangent. Okay. So what you do when you are trying to decide which one to use is you label your triangle. Okay. So we're going to take our highlighters and we're going to highlight the angle that it gives us. You never highlight the right angle, Austin. Never highlight the right angle. Do we highlight the right angle? No, never. So we highlight the other one, which is x. So if I'm looking at this, here is x. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight both of those sides. Okay? So you're highlighting the two sides that make the x. Now we're going to label our sides either the hypotenuse, the opposite side, or the adjacent side. So if I'm looking at this, here's my right angle. Where's the hypotenuse from the right angle? Where is it located? straight across. So the hypotenuse is always across from the right angle. Always. It's also always going to be highlighted. Okay? Now, the other highlighted side is your adjacent side. Okay? What does adjacent mean? Next to. So, your angle is always going to be between the hypotenuse and the adjacent. Okay? Now, the non-highlighted side, which you can always draw a little line to from the x, is the opposite. Okay? It will never be highlighted if you've highlighted correctly. So, for every single problem, your first step is to label your triangles. Questions? Okay. So now, sine, cosine, and tangent are all based off of ratios. So, to find sine, the ratio is opposite over hypotenuse. So, opposite over hypotenuse. Okay? So that is always the ratio for sine. Cosine is always adjacent over hypotenuse. And then tangent is always opposite over adjacent. Okay. And so usually I'll just shorten them to O over H. A over H and O over A. So there are a bunch of different sayings that help you remember sine, cosine, and tangent and the ratios. But what I always say is, oh heck, another hour of algebra. Okay? So, oh heck, another hour of algebra. And they're always in the order sine, cosine, and tangent. Same order that's on your calculator. Sine, cosine, and tangent. So I always say, oh heck, another hour of algebra. One more time. Oh heck, another hour of algebra. Okay? Oh, let's do one. So let's look over here to the right. So, in your angle, you can have an x. You could have the measure of the angle. You can also have this little circle with a line on it. This little thing right here is called a theta. Okay? It is just an unknown. It's the same exact thing as an x. If you see a theta and you don't like it, make it an x. It doesn't matter. It's T-H-E-T-A. Theta. Again, it's just a variable. It's a variable that's used for angle measure, pretty much. So what we want to do is set up our ratios. So again, we're going to highlight our angle. So in this one, we've got this theta right here. Well, my theta is this and this. So those are my two sides that I'm highlighting. Never the right angle. We're just assuming that it is. Well, you're not supposed to, but it'll be alright. Is that one dead? Lay it over there so it don't get mixed up. Okay, so step 1, we highlight. Any questions about highlighting? Which one we highlight? Anything about highlight. Okay, step 2, we label the triangle. So B is our right angle. Across from it, our longest side is the hypotenuse. Right? The other highlighted side, which is always beside of that angle, is adjacent. And across from the angle, never highlighted, is the opposite. Any questions on labeling it? Okay, so now we're just going to set up our ratios. So sine, we said, was opposite over hypotenuse. Well, our opposite is 5. Our hypotenuse is 12. So sine of theta is 5 over 12. Questions on that? Okay. So cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So adjacent is 6, hypotenuse is 12. So 6 over 12. And then tan is opposite over adjacent. Our opposite is 5. Our adjacent is 6. So 5 over 6. Questions? We're ready to move on. Okay. So what we are doing today is we are using trig, our ratios, to find missing sides. Okay. So before now, to find missing sides, we had to do Pythagorean theorem. But in order to do Pythagorean theorem, we have to know 2 of the sides. Well, if I look at number 1, I only know 1 of the sides. So I can't do Pythagorean theorem. So we have to do trig. So step 1 is we highlight our angle. Not the right angle. The other one, which is 60. So I'm highlighting the 60. Any questions on the highlighting? Okay. Now we're labeling the triangle. So here's our right angle. Across from it is the hypotenuse. You highlight the one that it gives you that's not the right angle. So it gave us 60. So these 2 sides make that 60. If you are struggling with which 2 sides to highlight, you can also draw an arc on the 60, and the 2 sides you highlight are the 2 sides that the arc touches, if that helps. So, our hypotenuse is always highlighted, our adjacent is always highlighted. Yeah. What do you mean? Like if the right angle is the only angle you know, we'll do that tomorrow. Okay. So the hypotenuse and the adjacent are always highlighted. Across from it, never highlighted, is the opposite. Okay. So which side do I want to find? Yes. Good. Adjacent. Which side do I know? The hypotenuse. Do I know anything about the opposite? Do I care about the opposite? Go away. Okay? So, all I know is I care about the adjacent and I care about the hypotenuse. Which of my trig functions talks about adjacent and hypotenuse? Cosine. Good. So, we're going to set up a little equation. So, it goes cosine. Inside the cosine, you put the angle. In this one, our angle is 60. Equals. And then you just set up the ratio. So, our ratio is A over H. Our A is X. Our H is 11. Okay. Any questions so far? Highlighting, labeling the equation. Okay. So from here, we just solve for x like if it's a regular equation. So if I have x divided by 11, how do I get rid of divide? Times 11. Okay. So then that's going to give me x equals 11 times cosine of 60. Because the 60 is inside the cosine, so you can't multiply it by 11. You're not in degree mode. So then we type it in our calculator. 11 times. Cosine is right above the parentheses, 2 above the 8. 60. 5.5. Questions on that? Anybody not get that? If you didn't get that, make sure you're in degree mode. Again, to do that, you go to mode beside the blue button, third line down, hit enter on degree. Push. That's it. Okay? So for every problem, you're highlighting, you're labeling it, you're deciding which one to use, set up the equation, solve for x. Okay, let's do number 2. So number 2, step 1, we highlight. In this one, we have the 37. Again, if it helps you, you can arc that. And then the 2 sides that the arc touches is what you highlight. So that's the hypotenuse. And this one down here, CB. Questions on the highlight? Okay. Our second step is we label it. So here's our right angle. Across from that, the longest side is always the hypotenuse. The other highlighted side beside of the angle is adjacent. And then across from the angle never highlighted is the opposite. Any questions on labeling it? Okay. So, which side do I know? The hypotenuse. Which side do I want to know? The opposite. Do I care about adjacent? No. Go away. So, in this one, I know hypotenuse, I'm looking for the opposite. Which trig function is opposite in hypotenuse? Sine. So, we do sine of the angle, which again is 37. Good. Equals. And then it's O over H. Good. So my opposite is X. My hypotenuse is 10.3. Okay. So every time you highlight, you label, you set up the equation. So now we want to solve for X. If it's X divided by 10.3, You multiply by 10.3. So we get x equals 10.3 times sine of 37, and that's what we type in. 10.3 times sine of 37. Good. So we'll say 6.2. Questions on that? You may not get that when you type it in. Anything. Okay. Let's look at 3 and 4. They're a little bit different. So if we look at 3, again, our first step is we highlight the angle. So it gives me 41. Again, you can make a little arc if it helps you, and your two sides it touches are what you're highlighting. Okay, so now we label. Our right angle is up here at C. Across from it is our hypotenuse. The other highlighted side, which is beside of the angle, is adjacent. And then across from the angle, never highlighted, is the opposite. Any questions on that? Labeling it is the most important part, because that's how you know which one to use. Okay, so which one do I know? Which side? Opposite. Which side am I wanting to know? Adjacent. So I do not care about the hypotenuse. Okay. So if I'm looking for adjacent and I know opposite, which trig function should I use? Tan, because tan is opposite and adjacent, and I know opposite and adjacent. So tan of the angle, which is 41. And our ratio is O over A. Our opposite is 4, our adjacent is X. 4 over X. Questions? What's different about this one? Good. The X is on the bottom. Your first steps, though, is still the same. We multiplied first up here. We're going to multiply first down here. We just multiply by X on both sides. Okay? Because you can't do anything if X is in the denominator. So then that gives us X, tan of 41, equals 4, because those X's cancel. Well, we don't want a minus. So if I have X times tan, good. So now we have to divide both sides by tan of 41. Okay. Because tan of 41, that's a number. Let's say it's 12 or whatever. It's the same thing as saying 12x equals 4 divided by 12. You're just dividing by the whole thing so you don't lose any decimals to rounding or anything. So then this is what we type in our calculator. 4 divided by tan of 41. And so we get 4.6. Any questions on that? Anybody not get that? Anything? Okay, one more. Let's look at 4. So 4, we got 37. That's what we're highlighting. Again, if it helps, you can arc the angle, and those are your 2 sides that you highlight. Okay, then we label. Our right angle right here is at C. Across from it is our hypotenuse. The other highlighted side is always adjacent. And then across from the angle, never highlighted, is the opposite. So, which trig function do I need to use? Cosine. Because I do not care about the opposite. I'm worried about the hypotenuse, and I know the adjacent. Everybody okay with why we choose cosine? So, cosine of the angle equals, and it's A over H. So, 11 over X. Questions get into here. Okay. So our first step is multiply. This time we're multiplying by X. And again, that gets rid of that 1 in the denominator. So we get X cosine of 37 equals 11. So again, it's X times cosine. So to get rid of times, good, divide. So we divide both sides by cosine of 37. That gets rid of that. So then we're left with X equals, and then this is what we type in our calculator. So 11 divided by cosine of 37. And hopefully you get 13.77. Question.